All right, everybody. Welcome to the Along the Watchtower podcast. I am LM Walker. Today is Thursday, January 21st, 2021. Yeah. There's really, 12121. We've got the first 17 executive orders, I believe it's 17, 13 or 17, signed by newly elected, newly appointed, newly inaugurated President Joe Biden. And none of them are really contentious. The real point of contention that we have yet to see, they're already caving on, which is the stimulus. We're already hearing talks that they are, because we saw Manchin, King Manchin. I still can't believe that actually flies on the hill. We saw that he walked back how he felt on the stimulus checks. Because initially, the representative from the poorest state in the union said absolutely not to the idea of $2,000 stimulus checks, let alone $1,400 stimulus checks. And somebody must have told him that probably wasn't a good thing to say, because he then slowly walked that back over the course of several days. And now we're in a situation where, because he's not going to use budget reconciliation, they're going to need 10 Republican votes, which is going to be interesting to see them campaign for, and they'll have time because they're saying that they're probably not going to get to anything until March. Yeah. So if you're going to see a stimmy, it probably won't be until then, because they have to hash it out and negotiate. Their talks, Manchin said he wanted targeted payments, and he wanted to bump up unemployment and extend it, things like that. So, already they're putting stipulations on it, conditions. So you probably aren't going to see that, or at least you're not going to see it in the form that you think it is, that you're hoping for. Like, it's not going to be expeditious, and it may not even be $1,400. Excuse me. But already, people are starting to see the sorts of, when they say politics as usual, business as usual, we wanted to get things back to, this is it, right? The empty promises. You had Bernie Sanders being asked about Medicare for all as a policy and as a position, and he was like, well, at this point, we're going with what Joe Biden wants. Joe Biden's the president. It's like, wow, completely just took the fire out, took the wind beneath his wings. And it's just like, well, and I mean, I understand. I understand that the alternative wasn't really a viable one. Definitely not. I get you. I didn't vote for either. I voted for Gabbard, and even she has her problems, right? I'm not a fan of her legislation to protect Title IX. I don't think governments really have the authority or the obligation to mandate what school programs, school sports programs do with their athletes. That's the school's business. See, the whole thing about it is irrelevant of where you stand on something personally. You have to think outside of your own personal interpretations of things. Your own personal, what you feel like is indignation for things, what you feel like is justifiable, right, through science. Whatever your explanations are, you do have to realize the limitations that you have as a person and as a governmental body, deeming and judging what can and can't be done by for another organization. That, you know what I mean? I'm not big on government mandates for what I think is micromanaging individual situations of individual liberties. That being said, this is what business as usual looks like. And again, I understand, like, the alternative. Here's the thing: the alternative comes before it gets down to two candidates. That's the thing for me. People are like, oh, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to vote Trump back in? It's like, no. Before it got to two candidates, we were supposed to discuss or debate or entertain the viability of, at the very least, a third-party candidate. It isn't as though we didn't have over 1,000. It isn't as though there weren't over 100 viable candidates, but there's something like 1,000 actual candidates that were trying and vying to get onto any sort of ticket recognition. Right, because what it is that you have to get a certain amount of petitions to become a write-in candidate, and it has to be by a certain time, and that all varies from state to state. So, for me, when you see situations where like over 4 million people vote third party, right? I think that says a lot about how there are underrepresented demographics of America besides what we see commonly spoken about as being underrepresented demographics in America. And I think that speaks loudly to the growing uh, discontent of the two-party system as we know it. We literally are back to business as usual, and they're talking about going back and increasing troop counts in the Middle East. We saw John Bolton under the Obama administration talk about the sort of island hopping strategy that we saw in the Pacific in the Middle East, expanding the foreign wars there from 2 to 7, right? And this here we are. So we're going to go through and we're just going to read specifically what these executive orders are. Let's see what's on the itinerary. I've already forgotten. We're going to try to finish up covering a lot of the stuff I've been trying to cover over the past few days, most of which, we'll start with, the recent development in Iraq. There was a bombing, a twin bombing, two bombings. And literally right as he's being inaugurated, it kind of reminds me of the Syrian gas bombing that happened twice in a row during the Trump administration on the same day or two. It's like basically like a year and a few days apart in the same area. And the same like sort of excuses were fermented and utilized to try and justify our remaining in Syria. So we'll talk about that. And we'll go over some more people being busted from the Capitol Hill riot. Of course, it's ongoing, but we'll cover the BLM activist actually who was there, and people for some reason I didn't think about this because I don't think in terms of tit for tat. Oh well, they're banning conservatives and they're banning people with alternative concepts and opinions. And they got to ban the leftists too. I don't think like that. So I didn't consider this when I read about the BLM activist who was at the riot, egging people on and things like that, agitating the rioters. But, it was pointed out in an article we'll read that his Twitter, his social media wasn't removed. He wasn't banned. And he was at the riot. He was at the riot agitating rioters. So what's the deal here? Which, of course, will lead us to 230, some 230 news, section 230. And how, some people are calling for big tech, as we've seen, the Silicon left, to increase its censorious Orwellian behaviors because it's seen as the savior, basically, of free speech, if there ever could be such a thing, the irony of that statement. And then we have some COVID news, right? I mentioned the German quarantine yesterday. Some people on my Facebook were attempting to. Well, what it is that I found it ironic that it was Germany who, is first that I can recall that will directly incarcerate quarantine breakers. And the whole thing is that although it isn't racially or ethnically based, it is still a knee-jerk hyperbolic reaction from a people's and its governments that historically has given hyperbolic knee-jerk reactions to emergencies. Right? We had because the argument was made like, oh, da 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 da. They are doing the same thing they're doing before. Look at the Nuremberg laws. It's like, well, the Nuremberg laws were based off of anti-Semitic eugenics-based concepts and ideologies. So not exactly the same thing. However, the Nuremberg laws were a response based on this racist ideology to the crisis that had been created post-World War I in Germany. Right, we remember seeing pictures of a whole basket full of Deutschmarks just to get a loaf of bread. That whole deal, the massive inflation, the economic hardship, the famine, the incomplete destroyed infrastructure throughout the country, etc. Not only that, but they had to pay back restitution to the Central Powers, which they lost to, right, the Axis. And so all of that created an untenable situation in Germany that was then placed, the blame of which was placed on the Jews. And Hitler was able to ferment, right? The National Socialist Workers' Party was able to ferment that discontent, that malcontent, that very desperate situation. and stoke fear and stoke animosity sound familiar? And so yeah, it's a different scenario, but it's the same knee-jerk hyperbolic reaction. There's an emergency, no one seems to have an answer, so let's lock the people up who we think are causing the issue at large, which is obviously wholesale ridiculous. But there's that, and so we'll discuss a few things. We'll get through as much as we can, and if not, we'll just keep on going. With that said, let's get into it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You know me, I'm always gonna keep trying to do what I do the best that I can. But yeah, let's get into it. So here is my Facebook. I have From the Hill Rising, always cigar and crystal ball. Crystal ball. So yeah, this is just some screenshots here of the mandates. We're just gonna read through them. So first things first, he launched a 100-day masking challenge asking Americans to wear masks for 100 days, requires masks and physical distancing in federal buildings on federal land and by government contractors, and urges states and local governments to do the same. Now, due to the wording, I'm not sure if those are two separate things or in tandem, as in he's asking Americans to ask masks for 100 days within federal buildings, federal lands, or he's asking to wear 100 days as well as in federal buildings and so on and so forth. Either way, it's a 100-day masking challenge. More likely than not, it'll be the former. He just wants everyone to wear a mask, so on and so forth. Fine. Number 2, stop the United States withdrawal from World Health Organization. Dr. Fauci becomes the head of the delegation to the WHO. Now, we've discussed how I feel about Dr. Fauci's, I don't want to call it flip-flopping, because he's not like he's going back and forth. He just initially gave us a diminished number, right? Okay, so first, here's the thing. First, he lies about the N95 masks, comes out later and says that he did so because he was concerned that first responders, doctors, people on the front line of dealing with the virus were not going to have enough PPE equipment. And in particular, his greatest worry was the N95 face mask. So then later on, he said, yeah. First he said, you don't need a mask. Then he said, you do need a mask. And he said, yeah, I said you don't, then you do, because I was afraid of not having enough for doctors and stuff. Okay. So the whole thing about it for me is that he's been pretty upfront, even when he's not upfront, right? How often do you see a politician lie about something and then come out and say, yeah, I did it because of this reason? And then the reason you hear is you're just kind of like, okay, I can see why you did it. I don't like that you did it, but I understand why you did it. Okay, I would rather not be lied to, because now everything you say I will be under the ire of you being able to just say whatever you feel like is necessary at the time. But I get it. So right, keeping that in mind, he then lies about the percentage of people that will need immunity in order to establish herd immunity. First it was 65%, then it was 75, 80, then he went to 80, like 85, 86, and he was on what was it CNET, and he just outright said it. Okay, I think America is ready to hear what I'm actually thinking. The reality is that when I first started talking about herd immunity, we didn't quite know when we were going to have vaccines available. And I don't think people really were going to understand how herd immunity works as a whole by hearing that 90% of people needed to either be vaccinated or naturally immune in order to establish herd immunity. Okay, 90% of 300 million, let alone 90% of 7 billion people isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is one of the reasons why the World Health Organization has finally, I think this was 2 weeks ago, I think I covered the article, came out and said that COVID-19 is going to be endemic. It's not going anywhere. So governments need to start considering life with COVID, right? Right now we seem to be in this position mentally where we need COVID to disappear altogether in order for us to start opening up and for government to function. That's not happening. I've been saying this literally since the day I started this damn podcast. It has entered the biosphere. Okay, it's here to stay. SARS-CoV-19 is a coronavirus. Like the flu and the cold, it is a seasonal mutational virus that's going to be here and is going to continue to mutate. The one thing we need to hope for is that it doesn't have like some sort of gain of function change where it becomes deadlier. Right? That's where Songbird, that movie, comes from. COVID-23, 54% mortality rate. Right now we have it's like 2.1. We have a 2.1 mortality rate. 80 something million people infected, and it's like 90 something million people infected, and it's something like 2 point something million dead. I mean, these are serious things. Not even these are serious things. I understand that, but we have to put them in perspective. We have to, and be thankful for that we are not at a 53% mortality rate. I mean, over half the people that got it croaked. That's the thing we need to put. This is not the Spanish flu. 2 million people in America alone, died of the Spanish flu. Okay, but I digress. Getting a little off topic per usual. And so there is that, with the virus becoming endemic, etc. So he lied about herd immunity and the percentage of people required for that to happen. Okay, again, I don't like being lied to. A and B, I'm a grown man. I can take the truth. I hope, but I would rather be told the truth than placated because someone has low expectations of my capability to do that, to handle the truth. So my whole thing about it is that between China, we've covered the Wuhan files and China's response to the virus. They're withholding information, they're lying about information, etc. I'm not a fan of the World Health Organization. It seems like one of the many institutions globally that's manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party. However, I don't think utter withdrawal is conducive to anything either. You can keep your enemies closer. Why not stay within the organization to understand how the CCP is influencing it, rather than just leaving and distancing yourself altogether? Of course, that requires a functional administration and allies within your administration within the WHO. Obviously, Trump didn't have that, so he couldn't do something like that. But yeah, so we're going to rejoin the World Health Organization. Number 3 creates the position of the COVID-19 response coordinator, reporting directly to Biden and managing efforts to produce and distribute vaccines and medical equipment. Number 4 extends the nationwide moratorium on evictions and foreclosures until at least March 31st. Excuse me. Number 5 extends the pause in student loan payments and interest for Americans with federal student loans until at least September, although he could, with executive order, get rid of $50,000 of people's debt, but he already said he ain't doing that. Number 6 rejoins the Paris Climate Accord, perhaps will hold all nations accountable under it. Number 7 cancels the Keystone XL pipeline and directs agencies to review and reverse more than 100 Trump actions on the environment. That's an interesting one, because you've heard about the Keystone XL pipeline, but I'd like to hear more about these micro actions that are being reversed. And I mean, are they actually micro actions, or are there just so many that they just list them in this fashion? There's 100. You don't hear about this extra 100 actions on the environment. I'd like to know. Should I have investigated that a little bit beforehand? Perhaps. Maybe tomorrow. Number 8 rescinds Trump's 1776 commission, which I've never even heard of. Is this that probably is the Electoral Commission, maybe? I don't know. What is the 77? I don't know. Who cares? It's gone. Directs agencies to review their actions to ensure racial equity. Okay. Number 9 prevents workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. We already have that. I don't understand. We already have that. It is, and here's the thing. I mean, I don't mind an administration that wants to put in its crosshairs inequality. But overemphasis on anything, like we're going to talk about overemphasis on foreign wars, right? Security theater, is bad, right? And I don't understand, why did you need to sign an executive order for something that's already a law? But fine. I'm sure that will unveil itself later. I hope it has nothing to do with CRT, critical race theory, going forward, but we'll see. Number 10 requires non-citizens to be included in the census and apportionment of congressional representatives. That will certainly help Democratic districts. Number 11 fortifies DACA, which will also help Democratic districts, but also 11 million people, some of which, and that's the thing, it's like, oh, well, you don't know if all of them are you know, how do you know who's a criminal? And it's like, well, hopefully the idea here is to then go through and sift through the 11 million people here who have suddenly gained citizenship to find out who has criminal records and things of that nature. Like that's my hope and insistence, but you know, you can't. You gotta let things unfold. Like I'm not going to presume that everyone who is under DACA is a fucking criminal. That's a little ridiculous. And I'm not going to presume that this administration isn't going to take the steps required to find out who is. So let's see. Number 12 reverses the Trump administration's restrictions on the U.S. entry for passport holders from 7 Muslim majority countries. I mean, my whole thing about it is well, if one wants to call it, at the height of the war on terror, the onset of ISIS and ISIL, I've never understood why there has been. I mean, I understand the politics of it politically, why there has been a partisan. It's been a partisan issue. The Muslim, not even Muslim ban, the Arab country ban. I don't even. They keep wanting to refer to it as the Muslim ban to make it seem as though it's Islamophobic, but the reality is that it's not a Muslim ban. It's not a ban on Muslims. It's a ban on people utilizing the passport from Arab countries that stoke terrorism. At some point, we have to acknowledge where terrorism is fermented, right? Just like everybody's looking to social media like, oh, domestic terrorism is fermented online on these particular websites with these particular da-da-da-da. Well, international terrorism is fermented abroad, usually in these particular countries. Like, come on. We have to be consistent. We have to be consistent. We can't have a serious conversation if we can't set parameters by which we work through these topics. Okay? I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Well, again, I understand politically why both parties would make it a partisan issue. Is it helpful? Obviously not. Number 13 undoes Trump's expansion of immigration enforcement within the United States. 14 halts construction of the border wall by terminating the national emergency declaration used to fund it, even though it was barely constructed as it is. 15 extends deferrals of deportation and work authorizations for Liberians, with a safe haven in the United States until June 30th, 2022. That's actually something I hadn't heard of. And that's interesting given how the Obama administration helped to ferment the Liberian Civil War anyway. Gee golly willikers. 16 requires executive branch appointees to sign an ethics pledge barring them from acting in personal interest and requiring them to uphold the independence of the Justice Department. Okay. All right. 17 directs OMB director to develop recommendations to modernize regulatory review and undoes Trump's regulatory approval process. So basically his first actions were similar to Trump's first actions, which were to undo the work of the previous president. Most of which I actually approve of. I'd like to know more about the EPA actions. I have no idea what the 1776 Commission is. I don't know why he needed an executive order to emphasize something that's already a law. And then a lot of it's just immigration stuff. So, all right. So, speaking of immigration, Biden signs about what? Well, actually, this is COVID related. This is COVID related. So let's just read this real quick. With a burst of executive orders, President Biden served notice Thursday that America's war on COVID. Hey, another war. The war on COVID is under new command, promising an anxious nation progress to reduce infections and lift the siege it has endured for nearly a year. At the same time, he tried to manage expectations in his second day in office, saying despite his best intentions, we're going to face setbacks as he brushed off reporter questions of whether his goal of 100 million coronavirus shots in 100 days should be more ambitious. The 10 orders signed by, he signed 17. The 10 orders signed by Biden are aimed The 10 orders signed by Biden are aimed at jumpstarting his national COVID strategy to increase vaccinations and testing, laying the groundwork for reopening schools and businesses, and immediately the use of masks, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So, okay. So, I wanted to play this clip from Rising. It's like, and Crystal. And this is a clip of John Brennan and Ben Rhodes, both of whom I believe John Brennan served as National Security Advisor under Obama, and Ben Rhodes was an NSA, I forgot under whom, but they're both campaigning for war in Iraq. Let's just listen.
Both of what they had to say in the last 24 hours.
Yes, there's a security issue. How do you identify armed militias who are intent on doing harm? But there's a broader societal issue that it's going to take many years to detox the disinformation, the lies, the hate that has been spread. A whole segment of the American population has been radicalized by what has happened over the last 4 years and by the fact that Donald Trump is no longer there. They can no longer see Donald Trump kind of representing their grievances in the highest office. And so those grievances are going to go back underground. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to deal with the broader societal issues that go beyond what even national security, homeland security professionals could do.
So I know looking forward that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of a country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. And unfortunately, I think there has been this momentum that has been generated as a result of, unfortunately, the demagogic rhetoric of people that just departed government, but also those who continue in the halls of Congress.
Right. So that sort of language, that sort of attitude, of course, leads to how the world's biggest tech companies are working to prevent more violence on Inauguration Day. We just heard from two senior spy officials, we'll call them, surveillance intelligence officials, whose response to political partisanship. Now, mind you, right, we got the poll that has, something like 54% of Americans think that other Americans are the enemy. We have the seeds of dissent that have been sown like here for years within our country. Going as far back as the Bill Clinton administration, right? People have been disenfranchised by contemporary politics for a long time. And Trump was a result of that, right? The Obama administration's culmination was expansive foreign wars, a domestic policy that was hands-off unless it entailed warrantless surveillance, no-knock warrants, the mass deportation of immigrants and the incarceration of drug offenders, first-time drug offenders. Like, people were lost, The change that was expected never came. So, that led to Trump, right? So here we are now post-Trump, the apex of all of that animosity becoming a siege. Physical, it made itself physical. It manifested in the real, right? The response isn't to identify what led to it. The response isn't real reconciliation, and really what entails reconciliation is acknowledgement, right? No, we need to up the enforcement. Now, I know I was speaking about them talking about the Middle East, and actually that's a separate thing, because Glenn Greenwald actually covers this because John Brennan also talks about religious extremists, domestic terrorism, etc. But he also talks about wanting to expand the position that we have currently in the Middle East. I realized I played that clip and I was like, oh wait, wow, he just wants to go everywhere, doesn't he? Anyway, I digress. But let's read this. This is from a few days ago, but we're just going to cover these couple of articles here. They relate to the Silicon Left. How the world's biggest tech companies are working to prevent more violence on Inauguration Day. Obviously, no violence took off. All of this talk about the FBI hearing chatter and there's going to be riots in all 50 state capitals, and we can't list the groups because that might assist them in their organizing. I don't know how, seeing as how letting loose the citizens of America got all of the people that you're now prosecuting caught. Most of the rioters that have been caught and prosecuted have been caught by people snitching on them. It's not like the FBI just went out and like, oh, I got you. This isn't Where in the World's Carmen Sandiego. Fuck that Waldo stuff. People are straight snitching on everybody. 45,000 digital tips. That's how you're catching people. So telling me that, oh, we don't want to release the name of the group and that's going to be helpful in our law enforcement pursuit sounds like a bunch of malarkey. But here what some companies are doing. So Airbnb said it would not take new reservations. It stopped taking reservations to Washington, D.C. altogether. Period. Just no. Groups like the Marriott, Intercontinental Hotel, Hilton, and Hyatt, they did remain open amid cries from DC's hotel workers union and other activist groups, shutting down as a lot of jobs lost. Etsy, which is known for its unique handmade items, has been a go-to destination for shoppers during the pandemic. They have 80 million items for sales, ranging from mass to personalized gifts. Their existing policy prohibits sellers from listing items that promote hate or violence. The CEO said in addressing the Capitol Hill riots and emphasizing the company's zero tolerance for hate. Shopify, straight up, you can't sell Donald Trump merchandise, period. And I presume you would think in that policy that would also entail anti-Trump merchandise. But I just have this sneaking suspicion that if I were to search Shopify for anti-Trump merchandise, I'd be able to locate it. But we don't want to use that as a pitchfork. But I'm just saying, we've seen the bias. We cover the bias here on the show. That's part of what this show's existence is about, is trying to sift through the bias. So, but we already know Facebook, you can't mention Stop the Steal. Facebook has gotten, actually, is Trump's temporary ban over? Because he was banned until the inauguration. So we'll see, right? Accusing Trump of blah, blah. Correction. Trump was placed on an indefinite hold, with Zuckerberg saying he won't be able to access until at least the inauguration day. So I haven't heard of him having any access to it. I'm sure if he were to regain access, that would be covered. So as far as we can tell, he's still banned. Twitter, as we know, has completely and utterly banned him. They banned him temporarily at first, and then he tried to go around the ban, so they banned him permanently. YouTube, Google has gotten rid of his channel. And I didn't know Snapchat had. I didn't know he had a Snapchat. One, it's surprising that anyone cares. Two, but it's surprising that it's not surprising that they took action against him. Snapchat will permanently ban Trump's account starting on Inauguration Day. Was it just like, why would you wait until Inauguration Day? That's the thing. It has nothing to do with him being president and having reach. It has everything to do as an individual. That's very funny. Indefinite suspension first though, but then they actually Snap was the first to permanently ban Trump, and TikTok doesn't actually allow. Let's see. According to the company, it doesn't allow violence, violent groups, and disinformation have no place on TikTok. They've never allowed paid political ads. Uber. What did Uber do? Uber didn't do anything. And they wanted to keep safety in mind. They won't tolerate violent or illegal behavior. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So here's an interesting article that was from the same day, how Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos can help save our democracy. Firstly and foremost, the love child of Howard Hughes and Tony Stark and the real life James Bond villain Jeff Bezos will not save anyone anywhere. How is it that at a time of such crisis and desperation, of culture, of faith in government, do we not turn inward towards ourselves or look to our neighbors? But this article is suggesting we look to the two richest men on the planet. How is it that two one percenters are how do you think in the class war that the top of the top of the top of the top of the top tier echelon of estranged, disconnected elites are going to assist the peons on the bottom? How do you? I mean, how many billions of net worth did these gentlemen acquire in the last year? How do you let's see what Yahoo Finance thinks. With all the attention on politics and COVID, you may have missed the recent headline: Elon Musk overtakes Bezos as the world's richest person. Maybe you did see it and thought, who cares? Well, maybe you should. Okay. Before you continue, this is what it says. Before you continue reading, a trigger warning. This column is about staggering wealth. The numbers you're about to read will shock you. Oh, and these are the guys who should. Okay. So now that I'm seeing this, is like, okay, this is obviously satirical. It's not so much that Musk is now worth, but mind you, the next article I'm going to read is how we can save the internet without destroying Section 230. Like the calls for social media and for the Silicon left to deal with domestic terrorism and inflammatory language for free speech online is a real one. We've read it. But I saw this article and presumed, and see, that's why you shouldn't presume things. So let's find out. This reminds me of the Jacobin cover. I don't know if you've seen the Jacobin cover of Biden. In the Jacobin cover is called Biden Our Time, right? So the Jacobin cover is of Joe Biden as basically this messianic figure rising to the heavens, surrounded by other Democrats like like Clinton and Schumer, and he's got drones overhead him, capping it off, and it's very suggestive. But it's supposed to be satirical. Why do I say that? How do I know that? Because the title, Biden Our Time, right? It's not Biden semicolon our time like an autobiography. Like another example of that would be Trump, Make America Great Again, right? It's not declarative. It's an exclamation. It's a play on words. Biden Our Time is a play on words of biding our time, suggesting that things are going back to business as usual. This is everything everyone's been saying. Going back to business as usual. So with this new president, we are biding our time, or Biden our time. Like, I don't know how you can. It's 3 fucking words, okay? 3 words. It's in the title. It's satirical. Why are people having a heart attack is beyond me. No. Let me stop pretending like I don't understand why people can't see satire anymore. Do not see ironies. For starters, they don't look into nuance. But for seconds, there is this descent of culture into this pit of permanent victimization and despair. And it's like you can't even be satirical anymore. Anyway, it's not so much that Musk is now worth some $200 billion versus Bezos $182 billion, nor is it a matter of the insane run-up of Tesla's stock. No, the biggest point is simply how much money and power Musk and Bezos and other tech billionaires have right now, and that power ties directly to one of the greatest conundrums of our time, which is the unprecedented command and control of tech giants Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and a few others have over us. It's a matter of contention that touches on everything from free speech to Donald Trump and on political divisions to national security to the very future of democracy. It's an issue I predict that will loom very large over the next 4 years. The question, according to tech investor Roger McNamee, author of Zucked, a book critical on Facebook, is, do you want to live in a country that's not a democracy? And I do think that kind of soul-searching is going on. I do think in time the country is going to make the right choices. Yeah. And I do know that there's lots of ways to have successful tech companies that are not harmful. Before we explore McNamee's point, we have to bury the lead. Before we explore McNamee's point, let's return to the Bloomberg list because the top of it jumps out at you. Currently, 8 of the 11 richest people on the planet are tech billionaires. Can you imagine? In addition to Musk and Bezos, you have Gates, Zuck, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Larry Ellison, and Stephen Ballmer. Collectively, these 8 individuals are worth $923 billion. Wow. Okay. It's extraordinary concentration of wealth and power, yada, yada, yada. We get it. breaking these guys up. MAGA, Antifa, liberals, conservatives, moderates, nearly everyone agrees that big tech is too powerful, but when it comes exactly to what the problem is, we diverge. Republicans, wrapping themselves in the flag of free speech, which really doesn't apply to private companies, say that big tech muzzles them, while Democrats say big tech is a national security threat by allowing foreign actors to manipulate elections and domestic terrorists to organize. And two things can't be true at once because... And yes, Congress has called Zuck, Dorsey, Bezos to task. Before we delve into that, oh my God, he keeps doing this, before we. You know what? You're done. We're moving on. Because this is essentially that same article, but not an opinion piece, how we can save the internet without destroying Section 230. Since a mob of blah, 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 and much of the conversation's been on reforming or doing away with 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which serves as a liability shield for online companies that host third-party content. Think anything from Facebook to your favorite message board. A target of both Republicans and Democrats, Section 230 has been in the crosshairs of lawmakers for years, and though there's a disagreement over what's wrong with the law, Republicans argue that 230 lets big tech silence conservative voices, while the Democrats contend it allows sites to host misinformation and hate speech without fear of litigation. And that fundamental disagreement is probably the biggest problem with the law, according to Jeff Kosseff, the author of 26 Words That Created the Internet. Nobody has agreed on what the problem is they want to solve, and it's just basic life skills. You have to figure out what the problem is before you have a solution, and I don't know if we'll ever have that, because there are people with vastly different visions of what the internet should look like. In a column last week, I spoke to critics of the law who convinced me that the Capitol Hill riots could be the end of Section 230, at least as we know it. Since then, I've heard from others who say I overlooked some of the law's nuances. They contended that making changes in 230 could have a far greater impact on up-and-coming tech firms that rely on the law's liability protections. Instead of altering 230, some say it's up to us, the users, to demand changes from tech companies. We can do this by abandoning social media sites that allow hate speech to flourish in favor of services that better appeal to our sensibilities. Conversely, you do the same thing when you move to a platform after a platform violates its terms of service, its terms of use, and not out of good faith moderates content that doesn't violate its TOS. And here's the thing, if you update a TOS, that's one thing. If you haven't updated it and you ban someone based off the TOS and they haven't violated it, then you've moderated content not out of good faith, but out of bad faith and bias, and that's the problem. And so when you move to an alternative social media website or whatever, an alternative platform, what you then end up having is the deplatforming of the platform. Go Parler and Amazon. Now, the reality is that Parler, here's the thing, Parler actually was banning leftists and rightists, left and right. Ironically enough, no one really covered the banning overall that Parler was doing, because their banning was not evenly, I can't say it was a 50-50, but the coverage that I saw was of leftists and conservatives being banned both. The reality of the matter, it's the same thing with any product, right? When a product gets canceled, like Gillette with its Men Can Do Better ad, it lost $8 billion off of its market price, okay? People speak loudly with their wallets. You go after the profits of a company, they respond in kind, all right? We've seen this with with Disney and Lucasfilms, all right? People responded to the latest Star Wars trilogy by giving back increasingly diminished sales, all right? And with anything really that came out from the Kathleen Kennedy sort of house of Star Wars, it failed miserably. Solo, a Star Wars movie, failed miserably. Rogue One. Rogue One did okay, but again, they weren't seeing the returns that they were getting because the content that they were producing was, well, that's a different conversation altogether, but the fact of the matter is that customers did not like it, fans did not like it, and they responded by not buying it. Same thing here. It's the same concept. As a consumer, you have the ability to affect a company's processes, how a company functions, by not buying their shit, by not participating in the usage of their program, in the usage of their product. I often talk about this, but then you again meet the problem of deplatforming a platform. You know, you look at the same thing with Gab. Yeah. But I digress. Let's finish this here because we are coming to the end of the show, and I again haven't even gotten through half this shit. But let's see here. Section 230, which is a law passed in 1996, provides a liability shield for internet companies that make good faith attempts to moderate the third-party content they host. But that doesn't mean Section 230 is the reason companies are legally allowed to host objectionable content on their platform. According to attorney Kathy Gellis, a Section 230 expert, the First Amendment is what allows companies to host such content without fear of liability, though the individual who posts the content doesn't enjoy the same protections for content that might violate the law. There are tiers of this, right? And again, all of this is under the auspices that hate speech and speech that incites violence is clearly identifiable. Me saying, hey, I think the adjudication logs for Michigan I think Michigan should follow Michigan's state election law and investigate the disappearance of the adjudication laws for their counties is not an incitement of violence, right? But it's controversial. And that's where the good faith, bad faith moderation comes into play. And that's where the First Amendment individual protections come into play, because I'm not saying anything violent, I'm not inciting violence or anything like that. I'm exercising my First Amendment right to ask a fucking question. I shouldn't have to be moderated or censored because I'm not violating TOS. I'm not committing any illegalities, right? So what the hell? That's the point. In other words, he said, what Section 230 does is it makes the First Amendment rights of the platform meaningful because it means that it's not just liability that they are being protected from. The articulations of Section 230 insulate them from legal process, even the attempt to hold them liable. In other words, Section 230 protects companies from having to shell out cash to defend themselves against legal proceedings that could be thrown out on First Amendment grounds anyway. And that works for companies both big and small. Revoking Section 230 could mean the end of the internet as we know it. Republicans and Democrats have both targeted 230 for different reasons, right? Republicans, conservatives feel like they're being censored. Democrats say that tech companies profit from the spread of disinformation and hate speech. Both Trump and Biden have slammed 230 and slammed the FCC for its narrow interpretation of the law to weaken its protections. While Trump wanted the FCC to curb instances where internet companies were protected from liability, the agency never ended up acting on the administration's request. Biden told The New Yorker last year that he would like Section 230 killed because it allows misinformation and disinformation to spread across Facebook. Here's the interesting thing about misinformation and disinformation and stochastic terrorism, as we've talked about on the show before. There is no certification for intelligence on the internet. There should not be a certification or verification thereof for intelligence on the internet. If we get to a point where people need to have a license to talk about things, because that's essentially what you're suggesting. And we've seen this all over social media, all over the place, where people who feel more entitled to their opinion than someone else's being entitled to express their opinion, will slander and or ad hominem attacks and try to basically suppress and whip people up to help in that suppression of that person's opinion. And then again, we have cases where there obviously there's violence, there's bigotry, there's intolerance being expressed. Yeah, we're not talking about the situations where it's warranted to call someone out. What we're talking about, and what seems to be the mainstay, at least from what I've seen, like really starting within the Obama administration, post-Snowden moving forward, because this really all started as a byproduct of WikiLeaks and the effective work that they were doing. And then the effective restriction thereof of WikiLeaks. We're talking about people who express controversial things. And it's not even just politics. We've seen this happen across the board, from everything to educational archival material from World War II to comedians being censored. It's across the board, and most of it is not in good faith. And we're going to keep hearing that, in good faith, in good faith, in good faith. So for me, the largest emphasis when people say, oh, the social media is used to spread disinformation, misinformation, it's like, well, who is the arbiter of truth then? Who's going to be the large governmental body that's going to say, you know what, this isn't correct, point out why? And that's another thing here. You have these fact check companies. We've seen this where they're wrong. Yes, they're sometimes right and they're sometimes wrong. That happens. Fact check companies are companies full of people. People are sometimes right and sometimes wrong. That happens. Okay. So for me, this whole idea of the arbiters of truth being big tech, or people within big tech being the arbiters of truth, is laughable. Like, who watches The Watchmen? Does anyone realize what is happening? How Ray Bradbury, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, oh God, I'm just freaking Ayn Rand. I always have trouble pronouncing her name. She wrote Atlas Shrugged. All of these people spoke about censorship, the technocracy, the pharmacological society. It's all coming to fruition. Philip K. Dick. It's all coming to fruition. Literally manifesting itself before our very eyes. The ability to express one's opinion openly, wholeheartedly, without fear of transgression is disappearing. But, I digress, per usual. We are running out of time. Coming up on the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Iraq and the Middle East. So John Bolton talked about the seven country plan that the military wanted to execute under the Obama administration to expand the foreign wars in the Middle East from 2 to 7. And it's something like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Liberia, Libya, that's 6, and I'm missing a 7th, and it'll come to me after the show. Whatever. So all of that kind of started to fade back into the background when the Trump administration began. One of the things Trump campaigned on was returning troops from foreign wars. He attempted to do that. I think he got a few thousand back, reduced our foothold in Iraq to 5,000, Iraq and Afghanistan to 5,000. We actually had 5 times as many troops in Washington, D.C. I think they're still there, interestingly enough. I'm not sure. But Biden has been there 24 hours. There's been 2 bombings in Iraq, and they're already calling for an increased presence in the Middle East. We have Macron, French President Macron, calling for an increased presence in the Middle East. Tuesday, reads military.com. Macron said that he hopes President Biden will show a greater military commitment to fighting Islamic extremists in several theaters of conflict, especially in the Middle East. So not just in the Middle East. We got to send you. We want you everywhere. This is, it's interesting. Why don't you ask Xi Jinping? He said he wanted to send 8,000 peacekeepers abroad. Please don't ask the Communist Party for peacekeepers. Please don't. Macron, who made his New Year's speech to the French military in Brest in Western France, said, "I'm certain in the coming weeks, the new administration will make key decisions that will mark a greater commitment and awareness in the fight against terrorism in Syria and Iraq." Now, keep in mind, this is the same Syria that Trump attempted to draw troops down from. But as Washington Post and the New York Post reported, apparently Pentagon officials had been lying to him about troop numbers. So, and that's what happens when your house is in disarray. Of course, you can't function. If no one trusts you if no one trusts you, they're leaking everywhere. You can't seem to get basic clerical and administrative functions going. It doesn't surprise me that people just lied to your face about military operations. Like that is a drastic failure of functionality. Can you imagine in any conflict at any time in U.S. history ever hearing about that? Unless it's the underpinnings of a coup. Like that stuff you hear. It's stuff you hear leaders of a coup doing. Right? That's it. I digress. Macron stressed that France has maintained its efforts to fight the Islamic State group in the region. About 900 French troops are currently taking part in U.S.-led international coalition. The Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier will rejoin the operation in the coming months. He also called for the United States to get more involved in multilateral defense cooperation. Under the Trump administration, the troop numbers in Afghanistan has been reduced to about 2,500, and American forces in Iraq have been cut in recent months to reach about the same level. In his speech, Macron suggested he's considering a partial pullout, a troop pullout in Africa's Sahel region, an adjustment he presented as a consequence of successes achieved by French forces last year and an expected greater role of involvement by other European countries. He said he'll make the announcement next month at Chad's capital, the deployment of 5,100 troops in 5 West African countries to represent France's largest military operation abroad. Right, so we had twin suicide bombings in Baghdad, at least 32 dead. And I mean, like I said, as a result, the cascading effect is, oh, well, we need to increase our troop presence now. And it's this back and forth and back and forth. Here we are 20 years later. We are a generation later. An entire generation of people have grown up knowing nothing but America being in foreign wars. I mean, technically, we have been in a war of some kind consistently since World War II. Like World War II, the Korean War had a brief pause. We saw the Vietnam conflict like grow with the French occupation. Then we went into Vietnam. Post-Vietnam, we had a few years, and then we had Grenada. Because after Vietnam, we then had different police, quote-unquote, police actions abroad all over, like the South America, right, with Grenada, as I mentioned. And then, after that, we went into the Middle East. We also had Mogadishu, we had Grenada, we had Operation Urban Fury, which was in Panama. So yeah, a bunch of police actions, because that's what you can see. The conflict started theater large, and then they just grew smaller and smaller and smaller, but they've been pretty consistent. America has pretty consistently been at war for a long time now. So lastly, we'll finish up here. I'm sorry, I didn't even get to the BLM guy who was there with a knife. He was egging people on. They didn't ban his social media account. Again, I don't do this tit for tat. Oh, they did it to the conservatives. They got to do it. I look for consistency. If you're looking for reasons to ban people for hate speech, for inspiring or antagonizing violence, seek no better example than people at the riot. Conservative and liberal alike, people at the riot antagonizing and agitating people to continue to be violent definitely deserve to have their social media revoked. I don't care what group you're a part of. Isn't that the whole point here, guys? Like, that's what I'm saying. That's what I keep saying. You can tell the intent. You can tell the intent of a person by the tactics they use. And it's like, if you really wanted to stop violence, if you really didn't like violence at all, you would call violence out across the board. BLM, Antifa, Capitol Hill rioters alike. If you really didn't want violence and hate speech and bigotry and intolerance to be promoted online, then you would be consistent and ban those people across the board. All right? That's what I mean about good faith and bad faith moderation. So lastly, this is actually about, we're back and forth with the domestic and international terror thing. This is back to domestic terror, right? Because we heard John Brennan and Ben Rhodes talk about domestic terror and big tech needing to curtail its growth here and blah, 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 blah. So Glenn Greenwald sounds alarms over Biden domestic terror war. Literally nothing about that could be more dangerous. Democrats, led by President Biden, have launched a war on domestic terrorism to essentially criminalize any oppositional ideology to the ruling class. There's literally nothing about that could be more dangerous, and it's not fear-mongering or alarmism to say it. Greenwald told Tucker Carlson tonight. Biden pledged to confront the threat of domestic terrorism in his inaugural address, vowing to defeat political extremism and white supremacy in light of the deadly riot. What is political? I mean, when someone says political extremism, it induces a particular, or it's supposed to induce a particular type of thought process. But when you tie it with white supremacy, right? The thing about it is that political extremism these days are anything that is controversial or oppositional to contemporary ideology. So now anyone that says anything that bucks the trend that is contrarian. And I don't like to use the term contrarian. Contrarians are just people who like to be oppositional. They just play devil's advocate for shits and giggles. They're trolls. I'm the type of person who likes to expose, express, and understand as much of anything as possible, good or bad. So I like to ask questions. I like to seek answers. That's the problem, is that these days seeking answers, asking questions, it's what's the term they use? Troublesome, right? Biden's commitment earned him praise from former director John Brennan, who likened libertarians to religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, and nativists. The libertarian message is less or no taxes, restrictive or small government, the renovation of the Department of Education, the abolishment of the Federal Reserve, the return of the gold standard to our dollar, the reduction or removal of foreign troops abroad, the renovation or the what's the word I'm looking for? The reform of our prison system, the abolishment of the for-profit prison system altogether, the abolishment of the for-profit pharmaceutical industry, so on and so forth. I'd say about good 80% of those are populist across the board. How is that religious, extremist, authoritarian, fascistic, bigoted, racist, or nativist? This is what I mean. Anything contrarian to the two-party system, anything contrary to the two-party system, anything contrary to the establishment, to the entrenched plutocratic Democrats or Republicans that we have had to deal with for decades now. I mean, the top three guys, Schumer, Biden, Pelosi, have been in my entire life. They have been on the Hill for over 30 years. Okay? Over 30 years. I mean, why? Why, after everything that's happened, 30 years is more than enough time to look at the record of these representatives and determine whether or not they are effectively representing you. But you know what? All I can do, like I said, I ask questions, seek answers. I'm just a curious guy. Whatever. That's the end of the show. Because again, I can just keep going on and on and on. But we're trying to keep this concise. Trying to be as effective as possible and cover as much as possible. But as you can see, every show there's like 40 articles I want to get to. It's not gonna happen. So we're getting better all the time. We'll trim it up. We'll trim the fat off the meat here and get down to business. We'll get it done. But please like, share, and subscribe if you like what I'm doing. And yeah, please be well to yourself and to each other. Take care.